was only really after my transplant that I kind of woke up and went, hang on a second. I thought I was an informed patient. I'd be told, oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. Maybe bring it down a bit, but you're okay. And, the research shows that for every year that your HbA1c is above 7, a person with type 1 diabetes loses 100 days of life. But I'm equally angry with the fact that the people around me who were helping me take care of my diabetes didn't tell me that there was a different way. If you think about the food environment within which we operate, it's not easy to eat differently or to avoid carbohydrates because they're everywhere. Yeah, I'm not prepared to be a statistic. And that's the reason for this.
I'd like to welcome Suzanne Schneider. She's got an interesting story to tell, I suppose. And so we were just talking about the fact that she originally hailed from South Africa. Where are you currently located, by the way?
I'm in the UK, so very far removed from the nice sunny weather of South Africa.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's quite a nice place to live if you like weather and obviously all the wild animals and the good biltong, as we talked about, which I hope more and more Americans will discover biltong because it's a wonderful way to get in some tasty nutrition. So
Yeah.
I guess let me allow you to kind of tell us about yourself. I know you've got an interesting story. I understand type 1 diabetes is part of this, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. You're right. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at quite a young age, at about age 11. And growing up in South Africa, we lived on a farm, so quite far away from the closest sort of big school, which meant I went to boarding school at a really young age. And then unfortunately for me, at the age of 11, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. But then living away from home meant that I had to rely on people who equally knew nothing about the disease to help me look after this crazy disease. And unfortunately, somehow it catches up with you no matter how much sport you play. I used to be really active as a kid. I represented my county in a number of sports, and I thought, great, I can eat what I want as long as I play sport and, burn it all off. And throughout my life, I was reassured that I was, doing okay. Unfortunately for me, though, at the age of about 35, I was diagnosed with end-stage renal disease. And for those that don't know what that means, it basically means your kidneys are failing. And unfortunately, that meant that at some point, very soon after that news, I had to start going on to dialysis while I waited for a transplant. And I can honestly say it was one of the toughest things that anybody has to go through. You are literally dependent on a machine for your survival. So for 3 years, I did dialysis, starting with dialysis at home. And then unfortunately, that was no longer really effective. And I had to then go for hemodialysis, which you then, go to the hospital for 3 times a week. And I think anyone that has gone through that process, when you finally get this gift of life, you want to do everything in your power to, take care of it. Because, the family that have lost someone and given you this incredible chance at a second opportunity, obviously equally feel, gosh, if I'm going to give this organ in good faith, whoever receives it, I'd like to know that they're going to look after it. And so that's really where my journey of this discussion starts, because I waited really long to get this gift. And when I finally had it, well, I had no idea how to take care of it. It was basically, well, here you go, and off you go. Basically, carry on with the life you had. You now have this freedom. And that's not really right, because what I then found was, after some subsequent research, many people, anything from 10 up to 40% of people can lose their transplanted kidney within the first 10 years of receiving this gift of life. And that's where the journey really starts, on how I try to find ways that we can better look after these new organs. And that's how I came to writing this paper on nutrition guidelines, of which there are currently 0.
You say there are no nutrition guidelines currently for, you talking about post-transplant patients? Is that what you're referring to?
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, Shawn, it is dire. I mean, while you're on dialysis, you really are on a really restrictive diet. I mean, because I was a person with type 1, I had the restriction, obviously, of trying to reduce, or eat a normal healthy diet as per the ADA guidelines. And then you have this diabetic dialysis diet, which has to reduce things like potassium, phosphate, protein, and sodium. So everything that's bright and beautiful, nuts, seeds, dairy, fresh fruit and vegetables, that's all on the naughty list. And the only thing that's left is beige and boring. So you have to decide, do I eat for my kidneys or do I eat for my diabetes? And so it's a real challenge to manage this diet while you're on dialysis. And I can understand that when you finally have this gift, well, great, I now have freedom. But the problem is, a lot of the transplant medications have such repercussions. Many of these immunosuppressive drugs really affect the body's ability to manage glucose, and we become insulin resistant. So, a high proportion of people who then receive these transplanted organs go on to develop what's known as new onset diabetes after transplantation. So, in short, no DAT. And so you think to yourself, well, how can it be that you're telling people, eat what you want? We know that the medication we give you affects your ability to manage glucose effectively, but just follow the healthy eating guidelines, and you might end up, with a new condition known as type 2 diabetes. And so this kind of really was perplexing to discover, which is why I think there's a real urgent need, to help us get this resolved.
Yeah, we have a surprising sort of, as you're probably aware, of the term double diabetes, where a lot of type 1s then go on to develop type 2 because they are, constantly, well, eating clearly the wrong things. I think that's fair to
Yes.
say. So, okay, so let's talk about, you'd mentioned, the sort of beige and boring, diet that's out there that consists of probably just a lot of refined carbohydrates, probably, which there's problems with that. So, what did you discover? How did you discover it? And what do you now recommend?
Wow. Well, certainly the research on patients post-transplant is very restricted. Because a lot of these patients have other health repercussions. So to do research on this group is quite hard. But what I have found is certainly protein is the one that's the big fear factor, and is based on a lot of research that was done. The most recent one I could find was a paper from 2010. And before that, it was, nutrition guidelines around protein was done in the 1990s. In fact, it's a paid for paper that you can only access once you, pay for the subscription to get behind the paywall. And that research was done on bonobos, so not even on humans. But the 2010 paper showed that, yes, certainly, people that have had this transplant do have an increased need of protein, certainly in the first few weeks post-transplant, for things like wound healing, just restoring the nitrogen balance, and helping people just to, get back up to speed, because many people, by the time you receive your transplant, you are nutritionally deficient, because many people have been on this restrictive dialysis diet for, who knows, years. So protein is a big one that we still feel there's a massive need for us to actually look at what needs to be done. But the big thing is, there's this hesitation of adding extra protein because of this fear of the stress it will cause on the glomerular pressure. And actually, that's unfounded, because the problem is it's the carbohydrates that cause the problem. That insulin, once you eat this carbohydrate and you have increased insulin secretion, that's going to cause more absorption of sodium, and that's what causes the increased pressure within the renal tubules also. So it's not really the protein that's the problem, and yet we keep focusing on protein when actually we should be looking at carbohydrates. So that's the one area. Secondly, definitely looking at carbohydrates. If we know that these medications cause this increased risk of insulin resistance, and yet we're telling people to eat a normal, healthy diet, which, according to the American Diabetes Association, is up to 60% carbs, how is that going to help? The other thing that we really see is, people who have these immunosuppressive drugs, and certainly in the first periods, very shortly after your transplant, you're taking a lot of antibiotics, immunosuppressants, and then you think about also the preparative sort of fluids that they use to transplant these organs in. Think about how that affects your gut microbiome, and also how that would then affect the actual makeup of the gut microbiome and the way that you're able to produce things known as short chain fatty acids. And those are very involved in things like immunity, the production of certain vitamins. So there's a lot to be done looking at just how people that have had a transplant really are nutritionally deficient. And you can't just say eat like everybody else, because unfortunately we aren't like everybody else. Even though we now have a functioning kidney. So
Well, I
yes,
think, well, I was going to say the comment about eat like everybody else. I think even the people that are eating like everybody else that have normal kidneys are still eating the wrong way in many ways, because we have such a
yes,
high
yes, yes,
prevalence
yes.
of chronic disease, which is clearly being driven by, in part, and a significant part by our nutrition. Now I'm just, because you have a PhD, I guess, in nutrition. Is that what I understand there? Based on that screen I'm
Yeah,
reading here. So you obviously have been well versed in what is considered the standard of care and the standard model for nutrition. And I think it leaves a lot of people, it falls short for many, many people. And I think diabetics, for one, are certainly part of that. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's a dearth of information about renal transplants, or any transplants in that matter, whether it's lung, pancreas, kidney, or whatever. Kidneys obviously being the most common transplanted
yeah,
organ. But so, yeah, the protein thing, I think that's something that has been a real, even most physicians are clueless about this. I mean, they just don't understand that, because a kidney spills protein doesn't mean protein is causing damage.
exactly.
And some of that research going back to the 1980s, largely on rats and mice, showing that if you feed a mouse high protein diet, they have problems, but we're not mice, clearly. Um, so, would you go so far as to say as protein is irrelevant? There's no harm at all from protein. I've seen some stuff, like, in fact, there was a study that just came out and it was interesting. It was looking at high protein diets in diabetics and kidney function, and they found that ketogenic amino acids, these ones such as lysine and leucine, and there's a few other ones that preferentially will be broken down into ketones as they're metabolized,
Yeah,
tend to be very protective. And where do you find these ketogenic amino acids? You find them in meat, milk, eggs, fish, things like that, things we're told that we're not supposed to eat. And yet, there may be some evidence that these are protective proteins. So what are your thoughts? So protein, you would say, in large part, is we should not be worried about it. Is that a fair statement? Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly.
do you know, I think it's fair, but there are people who generally also have other renal problems. So broad brush statement, I suppose, is not helpful to anyone if you have a, you know, particular kidney disease that might not have been caused by diet. So it could be an hereditary thing, in which case I can't speak for everyone. So everyone is individual. But broadly speaking, I would say protein is super beneficial because, especially for someone with diabetes, it not only helps you to maintain a much more stable blood sugar, and that is what you want as a diabetic, which also means you're going to be secreting less insulin, or as a type 1, having to take extra insulin. And insulin is really the problem here, because that is what's causing you to hold on to sodium and causing you to have the potassium imbalance. So if you can manage your insulin, that is the best thing you can do for yourself. But even if you're trying to lose weight, thinking about how protein helps you with satiety is a really beneficial way to help you manage just feeling full. And so you don't have to rely on snacking every 5 minutes, which is another thing that we get told all the time, which isn't exactly helpful, if you're trying to manage your blood sugar level. So broadly speaking, yes, I would say majority of cases protein is really beneficial, and specifically for people with diabetes. In fact, the paper that I refer to from 2010 made a distinction saying that diabetic patients who'd had the transplant actually had a slightly higher need for protein than those who were, let's perhaps put in brackets, not yet diabetic, because of the effect on blood glucose. So definitely I would say that's one to point out. But equally in a ketogenic diet, I mean, fat is equally important. And again, there are no recommendations on fat intake and what's, good or bad. But we do know that, polyunsaturated fatty acids are beneficial. And while the ratios are not quite agreed on, I think the thing that we know for sure is that these polyunsaturated fatty acids play a big role in inflammation. So you would just have had surgery, and so of course your body is fighting infection, trying to do wound healing. So how are you going to help yourself? Well, the omega-6s are really great for promoting inflammation, and you want that in the beginning because you want to get rid of all these bad pathogens. And then later on, you might want to change that slightly and have a higher omega-3 intake, because that's going to help you to fight the inflammation once you're in a more stable state. But again, there's nothing, there's no research on that. And we're basically just, again, being told to eat what the general population is taking in. And I think that's a really good place to perhaps spend some time researching, because we could possibly be helping ourselves just by eating a better diet. We could potentially help ourselves better, use these medications and not have to rely as much on some of these immunosuppressants if we're eating a good diet.
Let me well, that's an interesting statement, because all transplant patients, skin whatever that face transplant, they're all put on. There's weird things we transplant now. I mean, I'm not to say weird, but it's just things we never would thought of before.
Yes.
Kidney transplants have been going on since, I don't know, the 1960s, I think. I can't remember when the first ones came in, but every single patient that goes on a transplant is on immunosuppressive drugs for life. Now, you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that perhaps the amount might be modifiable based on diet, that you might need less. Is that correct what I'm hearing you say?
I definitely say you wouldn't ever stop immunosuppressants, but certainly by looking at the gut microbiome, research has found that by actually having a healthy gut microbiome, you're able to better metabolize these immunosuppressants and the absorption is more efficient. So actually, really paying attention to what you're eating could help you take maybe lower doses of these medications, because we know that these medications, even over the long term, aren't great. I mean, you have to keep the range within which your dose range so tight, because even those immunosuppressive drugs have a negative effect on the new transplant organ. So if you can reduce that amount, wouldn't that be amazing? Because I think even that would extend the life of that organ. So yes, definitely you would never come off immunosuppressants, but if you can somehow manipulate your diet in such a way that you can more effectively use the ones that you do take, I think that could be an option.
Let me ask you, because I'm certainly not a transplant specialist, but I know these drugs are used, pretty, obviously very with every patient. Is there a titration sort of level, or are they all just given the same formula? Like you all take this, and this, or is there something like we're going to adjust this based upon certain outcome metrics? How does that work?
Yes, it is definitely based on outcome metrics, and they do measure your blood levels of certain. They certainly look at your white blood cell count to see, what's happening within your own body. Some people tolerate certain transplant medications better than others, and there are, I think, something like three main categories of drug types. Um, I certainly couldn't tolerate one called tacrolimus, and so I need to take a different drug type. And so it takes a while for you and your team to figure out, what's right for you. And they take blood measures every, depending on how far you are down the line. But I'm 9 years in, and I still have blood tests taken every 3 months to measure, where I am in terms of range, to make sure I'm not under or overdosing. Because if you underdose, you put yourself at risk of, your own body rejecting the organ, and overdosing obviously is negative for the organ itself.
You mentioned white blood cell count, and my assumption is, obviously, if you're over suppressed, it's going to be very, very low. You're going to be kind of neutropenic, like a cancer patient, become neutropenic. And then the other opposite would be if the cells are really, really high, then that means probably ongoing inflammation, infection problems. So you want to keep it probably on the low normal side, would be my guess. I don't know where you like to be. And one comment I will make is I've seen a lot of people on carnivore diets, and they often see their white blood cell count runs a little bit on the low side, which I think
Okay.
generally is correlated to low inflammation. Correct me if I'm
Yes.
wrong on that, but what are your thoughts around white blood cells?
I mean, I do agree. I think that's the kind of measure for inflammation, certainly. It's interesting because for a lot of these transplant patients, it's not just the macros, but also the micronutrients that you tend to be deficient in, and certainly vitamin D, which is also an antioxidant, and vitamin C are really low in these patients. And because of the fact that if you've had a kidney transplant, often these patients they can't convert vitamin D from food, and so you have to take vitamin D in its active form as a supplement. So it might be slightly different for transplant patients. I think even on a carnivore diet, I don't think so, but I think certainly the absorption of some nutrients is slightly affected. I know vitamin D for certain is. Um, and most of these transplant patients do take supplement forms. Vitamin C is another one. Strangely enough, in some countries they are advised post-transplant avoid all fresh fruit and vegetables because of this risk of foodborne bacteria. It's not a standard recommendation, but the point is, oh gosh, if you just educate people on how to perhaps prepare food or store food, in the fridge, uh, the challenge is a lot of people are deficient in vitamin C. And again, think about wound healing, think about the fact that vitamin C plays such a role in the formation and lining of every cell in your body, which is why when you have scurvy, your your body starts falling apart. So it's definitely not only the macronutrients that we need to pay attention to. Interestingly, though, when you for this supplementation of vitamin C, it's not always the same, and you can definitely get it from the food you eat. You don't need to take supplements, and men in particular are kind of prone to kidney stones if they take vitamin C supplementation. So that's why I think just getting the right food from your diet in that instance would be beneficial. Because also, if you take in more than you need, you just wee it out. They call it an expensive wee if you take supplementation, because you really don't need to if you're eating a good diet.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I think most of us should be able to get the nutrition we need, uh, through food. I mean, I think most of it, I guess there's some exceptions. So let me just go back to your own personal story, because type 1 diabetes is already a lot to deal with. I mean, you have to become a pancreas. I mean, and then, obviously if you're injecting stuff every whatever basal bolus, unless you have a pump, then you can kind of offload it. Obviously some of the new technology has made it a little bit more helpful, I guess, with CGMs and so on and so forth. But that's a lot. I mean, that's always on your mind. You're always having to manage your insulin because you don't have a functioning pancreas that would normally do it automatically. It's kind of like, it's akin to saying you have to breathe. You have to constantly figure out when you need to breathe. And you think about how hard do I need to breathe right now when I'm exercising? How hard do I need to, it's all automatic, and you've lost that automatic governor. And so you now have to be under control. So it can be exhausting.
Yeah.
Not only that, now you have a kidney that is now replaced, and now you have to manage that. So what do you do personally to sort of improve your outcomes?
Shawn, I have to say I'm so lucky because when I had my transplant, I basically got two for the price of one. So I got what they call an SPK, so simultaneous kidney pancreas transplant. Pancreas, I have to tell you, I learned that the plural of pancreas is pancreata because I have two, my own and the transplanted pancreas. So I'm one of a few people who own pancreata. I have my transplanted pancreas and my own. And when I had my transplant, I was given this incredible, wow, life-changing opportunity because I'd been a type 1 for more than 25 years. And so when they plugged in this new organ, I literally was no longer a person with type 1. But it was, if you've carried this burden for 25 years, you also have a persona that everything revolves around food. From the minute you wake up, you think, do I eat? Do I inject? You eat something and you go, how much have I eaten? How much do I inject? And you panic, and your whole life revolves around thinking about food and whether you have access to glucose in case you have a hypo. And my PhD actually focuses on the relationship of whether the ketogenic diet is beneficial for people with type 1 diabetes, particularly in their relationship with food, because we tend to have such a preoccupation with it, and you can easily develop an eating disorder. And I can honestly say that since having had this transplant, the whole noise around food has just, obviously I'm still worried because I care about looking after my kidneys and my new pancreas, but the worry that I have every 5 minutes about whether I'm going to have a hypo has really disappeared. And I know for myself, following a ketogenic diet, that this is the best way that I can look after my new kidney and pancreas. And I'm very active with a group of people who are still, type 1. And I know what a challenge it is to just to manage life, never mind play sport, cycle, climb a mountain, just to manage life day to day is not easy. But having a diet that allows you to just have some level of stability really removes a lot of the noise and anxiety around managing your condition.
Yeah, it's I mean, I didn't. Well, pancreas transplant, obviously, that's a bit of a game changer there for sure. I mean, it's got to be a relief. I mean, I guess if you're already on an immunosuppressants for a kidney, there's no downside to having the pancreas, and there's all upside. I would assume. I mean, and so it basically. Okay, here's a question for you. You mentioned earlier on that many people that undergo kidney transplant, that kidney will fail within a period of a decade. A high percentage will see that. I mean, you're now 9 years out, and how are you assessing the health of the kidney? I mean, obviously, I guess you could look at things like GFR and things like that, but how has your kidney and your pancreas, whether you can assess that as well, held up over these 9 years?
Yeah. Do you know, my pancreas has been so well behaved. Never in the time that I was a person with type 1 have I ever had such perfect HbA1c numbers. I tell you, I want to frame it and pop it on Twitter because you often see people with CGMs, putting their perfect tracer on. And I thought, oh, now that I have that perfect tracer, I just want to brag. So my pancreas is behaving itself really well, and I'm so grateful. The kidney is the one that's slightly more temperamental, and that's the one that I, have to really watch out for. And I monitor it, like I say, every 3 months I go for these blood tests to make sure that it's, functioning within a reasonable range. You'll never get what they call an eGFR, estimated glomerular filtration rate. You'll never get 100% because you only have one kidney. So when you get the transplant, they only give you one kidney because somebody else could benefit from having the other one. So the highest you'll ever have is a 50% eGFR. And then think of the stress of the surgery itself. So if you can maintain anything, I would say anything over 30 would be wonderful. And especially after, this amount of time, if you can maintain a really stable level, then you're in a good space. So yes, I've been managing to do that, which, touch wood, I'm in year 9, and I have to beat the odds of getting over that 10-year mark. I genuinely think I will, but yeah, I'm not prepared to be a statistic. And that's the reason for this, Shawn. It can't be. I mean, in the UK currently, there are more than 6,000 people on the transplant waiting list. And so if you're saying 10, of those, you're going to have repeat business, you'll never have a zero waiting list. You're literally just having a perpetual, like, in out cycle. So how can that be acceptable? It baffles my mind. It's just mad.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And there's only so many organs available at any one time that actually are acceptable for each individual person. As you know, there's a specific matching process that has to go through that. Um,
Yeah.
so obviously 9 years in, you've been on a ketogenic diet. Um, would you say that a ketogenic diet is the best option for many of these folks?
I really think, and I know I have to give my personal disclaimer, and I'm going to say I really genuinely believe that because we know that these drugs have an effect on our ability to manage glucose. So why would you eat something if your body is not able to effectively manage it? That's point one. But the other thing is, I think for many people, especially in the research I did, a lot of the hesitancy of the medical profession to prescribe a ketogenic diet is often because they think it's too difficult to do. And you want to say, well, yeah, it might be too difficult to someone who isn't motivated and it doesn't have a specific health condition for which they really are determined to look after themselves. So I think motivation is also really affected by the fact that if you really want to take the best care of yourself, you will do what it takes to help yourself. And if you have the right guidance and you have people in a community, I think community support is massively important. If you think about the food environment within which we operate, it's not easy to eat differently or to avoid carbohydrates because they're everywhere. So I think having a supportive family and people around you that help you to eat healthily is also important. But certainly from a health perspective, I think this is the best thing you can do for yourself, because it's going to really help you manage your blood glucose in the best possible way, and your kidneys. So yes, it would be my answer.
Well, and the one thing, the point you make, talk about was it's challenging to eat in a certain way. I mean, I would argue that, if you just tell people, hey, just actually cook your own meals and not rely on all the ultra processed convenience food, packaged food, that would
Yeah,
be difficult for a lot of people because we've been so sort of used to just the convenience. And it's like, okay, well, now I have to actually cook for myself, which would be infinitely better for probably the whole population, regardless of whether they're ketogenic or not, just cooking their own food, preparing their own meals. And
yeah,
because we've sort of accepted this convenience thing, which has been a product of marketing over the last 50 years or so, that we've all just kind of like, there's just generations that don't even know how to properly nourish or even cook for themselves. And so that's a thing that I find. It's like once I figured out how to make a steak well, I mean, it's so easy. I said it's way easier for me to eat this way. Yes, I mean, I could open a package and do that, and it would be a little bit more convenient, but it's not hard at all at this point for me.
Yeah.
And I think most people that actually care about their health is interesting. So practicing nutrition as a nutrition PhD in the UK, and I don't know if you work for the NHS or how you interact, but you probably are still yet, even in 2025, a minority, in your belief system. I imagine most of them are still pushing the, 60% carb diet with, the balance, grains, nuts, legumes, minimize fat, particularly saturated fat. What is your interaction with like your colleagues and within your, I guess you have a governing body, I suppose?
Well, luckily for me, Shawn, I'm not practicing in the NHS. I think I vowed to myself that I know what I believe in, and I think I would struggle to operate within guidelines that I don't 100% agree with. So I don't currently practice in the NHS, which is very beneficial for me. I think that the good thing is that when I do encounter people who are interested in this way, they generally come to me because they already are interested, and maybe that helps because if you're trying to win someone over who is already anti, it takes extra work to win them over, and not everybody is open to a scientific kind of curiosity. So I'm very fortunate that I generally interact with people who are interested in this way, but that it's not easy because I don't have an answer for you in terms of how people who do work for an NHS type of institution would go about this. I think the best way to do it is just, I'm sure you know Dr. Ian Lake. I mean, he's very effective in how he works. He has a website of his own specifically for people with type 1, and they can consult with him independently. But even if they come to his practice, he can give them information and say, look, if you want to read up, here's some information. But he obviously can't espouse anything that's outside of the guidelines. So that's really difficult. But there are ways and means. I think there are quite a few support groups also on various social media channels. I don't say that's was the official way. I mean, if you want to do it safely and you want to adjust your insulin in a safe way, you obviously need to speak to someone who is supportive. So if you can find yourself a medical professional who is able to help you adjust your insulin safely, then I would say look out for those people. I can highly recommend Dr. Ian Lake's Type 1 Keto page has got a load of information for people with Type 1. But certainly, yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, our company, Revero, we have physicians all over the United States. And the nice thing is all the patients that come to us want to get healthy. They're like, and and they're willing to make those changes. And of course, the physicians like it because now their patients get healthy for maybe the first time in their career. It's really
Yeah,
cool to see. And, like I said, particularly, gosh, for, well, any diabetes, but particularly for type 1 diabetes, I think a low carb ketogenic, even a carnivore diet can be outstandingly, and it dramatically reduces the need for as much insulin.
yeah,
And I think that is tied to better long-term outcomes. And we know people that consume huge amounts of insulin to manage their blood sugar tend to have worse outcomes across the board, to include things like cancer risk going up quite a bit. So it makes sense to, kind of keep that insulin usage to just the lower amounts in many
yeah,
cases.
yeah.
When you, so I guess back when you were first diagnosed with type 1 as an 11-year-old, and we know probably the least well-controlled diabetics are kids. I mean, like teenage kids, they just end up with really high A1Cs, and it's just because maybe they just don't have the discipline or the desire, or don't feel the negativity yet. When did you make your transition to low carb, and what was the early years as a type 1 diabetic problematic, and how did that compare to maybe doing it with a more sort of sane approach, I think?
Oh, Shawn, if I could go back and talk to myself, wouldn't that be amazing? Do you know, because as a kid, I think nobody wants to be different and you want to stand out for the reasons that you choose, not for the reasons that a medical doctor has told you that you are different to your peers, you know. So, I mean, I think I managed my type 1 through playing sport. And honestly, it was because in boarding school every afternoon from after lunch, so from 2:30 to 4 was study hour. And unless you played sport, you were in the study room. And I thought, I ain't having that. So I played sport, which meant I could get out and, skip the afternoon study. And I seriously think that that is what at least kept me in some level of control. But even so, that clearly wasn't good enough. I mean, I don't know what you currently use, but if I was say 7.5, 8, or 9 millimoles per deciliter, that was the average reading, and I'd be told, "Oh no, you're fine. Maybe bring it down a bit, but you're okay." And the research shows that for every year that your HbA1c is above 7, a person with type 1 diabetes loses 100 days of life. And you think, well, my whole life I was told I'm doing okay. So at the age of 35, being told that you needed an organ transplant, you think, well, how the hell did that happen? Because I totally believed that I was okay. And I think what is a little bit unfair is, I mean, we're all part of the human species, we're all part of the human race. So if that is what is accepted for the human body to function normally, to have a blood glucose between 4.6 and 6, that is what's considered healthy and normal. Why is it okay to say that a person with type 1 can function at 7, 8, 9? So I wish as a teenager I know or had known what I know now. And it was only really after my transplant that I kind of woke up and went, hang on a second. I thought I was an informed patient. I'd studied nutrition and I thought, oh, hang on a second, this doesn't quite add up. Why am I being told to eat all these carbs when I then have to take insulin? And it was only once I'd started doing my PhD that I really went, light bulb. So, yeah, that unfortunately, our younger selves are not quite as bright as our adult selves.
Do you think that it's possible that had you managed your diet a little differently early on in your type 1 diabetic career, you might have avoided the need for an organ transplant? Do you ever think that about that?
I mean, I, of course I do. And I think one lives, sometimes it's so easy to live your life in the rearview mirror and go, oh, regret. Of course I do. And I'm angry with myself that I had got to that point, you know, but I'm equally angry with the fact that the people around me who were helping me take care of my diabetes didn't tell me that there was a different way. So, yes, I'm angry, but then I also think, well, what's the point? There's no point getting angry. I need to just, if I can help somebody not have to go through what I have been through, then I have contributed to the world. I, yes, it makes me mad, but I can't change it. And I'm grateful that I can use this to to better effect maybe. I certainly wouldn't have been studying a PhD if this hadn't happened to me. And I've had so many opportunities through studying this. So maybe in another way it's been good. So yeah, I'm angry, but I'm also fired up.
Well, I guess, you think about it because, obviously you went through the transplant and that has been life changing for you. And so it's kind of like if I maybe was on a ketogenic diet from the beginning, maybe I would have never needed a transplant, but I would still be type 1
Yeah.
injecting insulin all the time. And then so it's just kind of a trade-off. Now, fortunately, we live in a world where some people can get transplants. I mean, pancreas transplants are still pretty rare.
Yes.
Obviously, I mean, there's just not a lot of, and I think they're technically more challenging to do. And they're just, it's interesting to see. I mean, I know, um, I've talked to some type 1 diabetic researchers about, what does the future of type 1 look like? Is there ever going to be a cure for this?
Mm,
Here's the other thing that's interesting because, why you develop type 1 diabetes. Probably we don't know. I mean, it's some people that maybe it's a viral infection, maybe it's something that had occurred. And a lot of people, you wonder why, if the cause was an autoimmune process and that autoimmune process continues on indefinitely, why hasn't your new pancreas been attacked in the same way? Oh,
Yes,
any
yes.
insight into that?
That's really, you're right. I've also kind of dipped my toe into it, but I haven't really found much. But I know there was a study, I think it was somewhere in the Nordics, where they'd looked at even vitamin D levels from the parents and how that might affect uh, progeny of, and their risk of type 1 diabetes development. So even that's an interesting area. I've also heard about, and in fact, I have a colleague who developed type 1 as a result of trauma. He was a veteran, and when he returned from, serving, he developed type 1 literally about a month after. So I know there's also a link between trauma and possibly an epigenetic, trigger. But there are, I think that one of the biggest ones that I've kind of, certainly for me, my trigger was a viral infection. Um, I don't know. I think the challenge is when they've done research on pancreatic cell transplantation. From what I've seen, they're not as successful as an entire organ itself. Those pancreatic cells don't seem to last as long as the entire organ itself, and they seem to have to repeat them every couple of years. So I don't know what that solution might be, but it is wonderful that there are. I mean, even pancreatic cell transplants wasn't a thing 20 years ago. Um, so I'm grateful that they are researching these things, and how wonderful that I was one of the few people that lived in an area that had access to a center where they were experts on pancreatic transplants. So yeah, I wish I knew what that answer was, but I think you're right. There's something beyond just autoimmunity, because how come it is that, well, maybe the immunosuppressant drugs have something to do with it, but I don't know. I don't know is the answer to that.
Yeah. And who knows if we'll ever know. Hopefully one day we'll be able to do that. Hopefully they'll be able to find a cure for type 1 diabetes and some of these other things. I see, just with autoimmunity in general, I've seen some significant really reversals in many conditions, but type 1 seems to be one where that doesn't seem to happen very often. I've seen a handful, maybe less than, 5 or 6 patients who have claimed that, with type 1 diabetes, they've been able to come off all insulin by going on a diet. But it's unclear if it's maybe the diagnosis was unclear, maybe they were too far, it's still in the honeymoon period. But it's interesting to see that nutrition does seem to play a role on autoimmunity, and whether it's mediated through the gut, which I suspect it is, as you mentioned, as you mentioned about the immunosuppressive drugs
Yeah.
being affected by how our gut is behaving. So interesting. So let me ask you, because we're starting to get low on time here. I guess, are you on social, because you mentioned X, so are you on social media, and do you have like a website, and are you actively sort of spreading this information?
Yeah, so I am on X and Instagram, but and obviously LinkedIn, but I'm really trying to find people who are willing to, work with me and get these nutrition guidelines out. And I'm hoping that I was recently at the Keto Live Conference in Switzerland, and there were some people there that were very interested in, partnering up to see how we can spread the word. And I'm hoping to see how we can. There are there are areas that we still don't know enough about. So I definitely want to research some more and make sure that if we put some guidelines out there, there's no way that people can refute it then, because then the research is there. I mean, what we have at the moment is very limited, but we can certainly, what's been published in the paper that I recently published, that was peer reviewed, and we know that that's accepted. But there is certainly work to do, and I definitely want to make sure that we share this as far and wide as possible, because there are people like me who want to take care of this amazing gift, And if we can empower them, why not? Surely that would be to everyone's benefit. So yes, I am on social media, and if anybody does want to get involved and partner up, I'm more than happy to do so.
What are you? Where do we find you on social media? What are you under? Just Susan Schneider, or where are you
Yes.
located? How do we?
So Twitter would be Suze Schneider. LinkedIn is Suzanne Schneider 1. I don't know how I got the one, but I'm number one, Suzanne Schneider. And on Instagram, I'm also Suze Schneider. So Suze Schneider.
Well, thank you for coming on. I unfortunately have to run. Suzanne, good luck with that. If there's anything I can do, let me know. I'll be happy to spread, whatever work. I think this is invaluable for so many people.
Well, I honestly
Thanks.
appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for this
Sure.
opportunity.
All right. Well, have a wonderful evening there in the UK. Hopefully, the summer is warm, a little warm, not so rainy and chilly. But
It is so nice, I tell you. My door out here is open and it's lovely. So I'm going to go head out for a walk in the sun. So it's good.
perfect. Good. Thank you for doing this. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Bye bye now.
Take care.